Okay, so as I said, today is the birthday of Louis the 14th, the Sun King, the great French monarch, and who had an intense interest in architecture as well. And he commissioned very important architects to build. He even invited Bernini from Italy to propose a new facade, the eastern facade of Musée du Louvre. Bernini did this, but in the end, he didn't choose his proposal. Anyway, let me start with Louis Le Vau. So today I will talk about four architects: Louis Le Vau, Claude Perrault, Jules Hardouin-Mansart, and André Le Notre, the landscape architect of this king. Truly an impressive landscape designer or landscape architect. But first, Louis Le Vau. Louis Le Vau was, we don't know exactly the day when he was born, but he died in October 1670, was a French Baroque architect who worked for Louis the 14th. Well, to call him Baroque is a little bit simplistic because he actually, as you can see in the next wording, he was an architect that helped develop the French classical style in the 17th century. So yes, he came from a near past that was Baroque, but he employed design methods that announced the classical or the neoclassical so-called style in France. Le Vau started his career by designing the Hotel de Beautru in 1934. Then by 1639, he was developing townhouses for rich citizens, such as, anyway, their names. And then his most notable work during this period is the Hotel Lambert. Le Vau also designed country houses, including the Chateau de Livry, later known as the Chateau du Rency. In 1654, his career was advanced through his appointment as the first architect to the king, succeeding Jacques Le Mercier. He was commissioned by Jules Cardinal Mazarin to help rebuild part of the medieval Chateau de Vincennes. Shortly after, in 1656, so all these people that I will talk about today, they were active in the 17th century. So in 1656, he was given the important commission to build the Le Chateau, the castle of Nicolas Fouquet, Vaux-le-Vicomte, with the help of André Le Notre and Charles Le Brun. These are very important names for the culture of the time. About André Le Notre, I will talk, not about Charles Le Brun. Charles Le Brun was a painter, and Louis Le Soleil thought that Charles Le Brun was the greatest painter ever. He was an interesting painter, it's true, and had also interesting graphic works, but he was not an architect. Le Vau's most notable work in the Vaux-le-Vicomte is the oval salon facing the garden. We are going to see it. This design, an example of a salon à l'italienne, vaulted, two-storied room, develops the idea that a simple form governs the shape of the main section of the building. The most notable work of Le Vau's career was at the Palace of Versailles, with which he was involved for the remainder of his life. He added service wings to the forecourts and, after 1668, had rebuilt the garden facade to be totally classical. So you see, the so-called Baroque architect actually rebuilt the facade of the Palace of Versailles towards the garden to be totally classical. Le Vau was assisted by François d'Orbay, who completed the work after Le Vau's death. Le Vau and d'Orbay's work at Versailles was later modified and extended by Jules Hardouin-Mansart. So now we talk about Louis Le Vau, Then we'll talk also about, well, about Claude Perrault, and then Jules Hardouin-Mansart. This was the man with a nice thin mustache, like a musketeer. And yeah, I think he died at 58 or so. The typical posture for you know, the architect of the king. Anyway, he was a good architect, and you see here a few you know, samples of his work. We are going to begin with this chateau, about the Vicomte, and then we'll go through. This is the l'Institut de France. We are going to see too, and then the eastern facade of the Louvre, and you know, then we'll go to another architect. Some drawings by him or after him. It's sometimes hard to know, because you know that there were reprints and you know, redrawn things, and who knows. Anyway, this is just to familiarize ourselves with the general so-called style. This is the Chateau of Vaux-le-Vicomte, an important work by him, and we are going to see pictures with the building. Vaux-le-Vicomte. So we talk about Le Vaux, born in 1612, I think, or 1613. So he began almost with the beginning of the 17th century. And now we see this important estate that he built for Fouquet, and Le Notre, I think, did the gardening, and it is remarkable indeed. André Le Notre was had genius as a landscape architect. But the building that you see here was designed by Le Vaux. I don't know about the others here. Anyway, a very impressive vista, and at Versailles also, and you know, the vision of Le Notre was, I would say, cosmic almost, and these are magnificent examples of French so-called classical gardening that, you know, in a way celebrate authority, but they do it with sensibility and with a feeling for the inexpressible somehow, of the infinite. I have the feeling. Anyway, you know, you can see the immensity of the site. It's a fine estate and a fine building, or fine buildings. So Louis Le Vaux, Vaux-le-Vicomte. If I remember correctly, I think Louis Le Soleil became jealous of this great achievement that was done not for him but for Fouquet, and put him to prison, and then he confiscated the, you know, the palace. And so, you know, the usual you know, quest for power and you know, representation, so to speak, of that power. Men can be children indeed. Doesn't matter they are kings or not, doesn't matter their age. It's the same, you know, whole story with the fight between the boys, who has the upper hand. Anyway, Vaux-le-Vicomte, Le Vaux. And this is the plan he designed. So this room, which is it's quite large, and we are going to see it. We are going to see pictures of it. Here it is. It is a very fine and accomplished room that Le Vaux obtained here. Opened as it is towards the garden. There was splendor indeed, but you know, this is about the authority of power, or the power of authority. But again, this was not built for the king himself, but for someone who was very close to the king and important politically and socially, Fouquet. It's a great room indeed. Le Vaux, at Vaux-le-Vicomte, and the view through the doors opened towards the infinite as André Le Notre envisioned this. Very nice. It's really not for proletarians, but what can we do? L'Institut de France. This is, it was called differently, I think, Collège des Quatre Nations, the College of the Four Nations, but now it's the Institute of France there. And here it is. It's possible that La fameuse Académie Française is here. The French Academy, which invited, when Le Corbusier became older, invited him to be part of, and of course he refused. He refused because he was fighting with the Academy all his life, and the Academy fought back. Anyway, so this is l'Institut de France. Here we have an oval room as well, which was just restored from what I read. Here you can still see the scaffolding. This is, the French are interesting. On one hand, they brought upon us liberté, égalité, fraternité. That is, you know, through revolution, they burned down Bastille, but they also have a very obvious affection, it seems, a need for authority, for centrality, for a king, for an emperor, even today. And architecturally, this is expressed very well by all the avenues, the boulevards that converge towards l'Arc de Triomphe. So there is some kind of a paradoxical conflict between, on one hand, an intense desire for freedom, for liberté, égalité, fraternité, and on the other hand, it seems the need for centrality, for power, for a centralized power. Symmetry, as you can see here, this bridge goes right into the entrance of l'Institut de France. This is centrality, is willfully expressed, this need for the stringencies of authority. This is shown in many examples in French architecture. Louvre, La Galerie d'Apollon. This is a gallery within the Louvre where Louis Le Vaux worked. So La Galerie d'Apollon is a large and iconic room of the Louvre Palace on the first floor of a wing known as the Petite Gallery. Its current setup was first designed in 1660. It has been part of the Louvre Museum since the 1790s. Was completed under the lead of Félix Dubin in the mid-19th century and has housed the museum's collection of the French crown jewels since 1887. Anyway, this is a picture from more recent times, but we are going to see also pictures with the room as Le Vaux designed it and envisioned it. Here we could say indeed that there is a Baroque spirit and the Baroque art, but you know, it depends also on the conditions of light. When the light is not so intense, artificial, probably you can see the room has a certain level of not austerity, but being sober, so to speak. But if you look in detail, well, it is Baroque. It's a room. Now the Louvre, the colonnade, here he worked together with Claude Perrault and Charles Le Brun. The Louvre colonnade is the easternmost facade of the Palais du Louvre in Paris. It has been celebrated as the foremost masterpiece of French architectural classicism since its construction, mostly between 1667 and 1674. The design, dominated by two loggias with trabeated colonnades of coupled giant columns, was created by a committee of three: the Petit Conseil, consisting of Louis Le Vau, about whom we talk now, Charles Le Brun, and Claude Perrault. About Claude Perrault, I will have the next presentation. Louis Le Vau's brother, Francois Le Vau, also contributed. Cast in a restrained, classicizing Baroque manner, it interprets rules laid down by the ancient Roman architect Vitruvius, whose works Perrault translated into French. Perrault was also a doctor, not in architecture, but in medical arts. Anyway, this is the east facade, the eastern facade of the Louvre. The pyramid by Empey is on the other side, on the western side. Yes, it is a more restrained architectural language. It's true. We are going to see a very nice picture of the colonnade. The actual colonnade was designed by Claude Perrault. A scene from the construction site. This is a drawing of this facade drawn by Blondel, I think, later. And this is the elevation proposed for that facade, but the proportions seem to be different, by Bernini, the great Baroque Roman architect, whom Louis Le Soleil, Louis XIV, invited to Paris for this purpose, but in the end, he didn't choose the proposal by Bernini. Here it is how it was built. So this is the eastern facade of the Louvre, designed by and built by a committee of three, as it was called: Louis Le Vau, Claude Perrault, and Charles Le Brun. And this is, I like this picture, not only because it is in black and white, but you can read the architecture in its essence better. Apparently, this was done, this particular part of the facade was done by Claude Perrault. Okay, and now Versailles. In Versailles, he did various things, Le Vau. Apparently, the most important thing he did, the elevation, the facade towards the garden, he made it, distinctly classical. I'm talking about all this facade. From here towards us begins the great work of André Le Notre. But I think he also added some wings here, maybe these, Le Vau. And here is the city, I'm sorry, the city of Versailles. I remember when I visited that somewhere here, there is also a McDonald's. What is McDonald's doing here? Well, making money, obviously, because so many tourists. When 3 years ago, I went with students from Bucharest here, there were so many buses and an ocean of people. I mean, ocean. We had to leave. I mean, it's a big industry here. Everybody wants to see Versailles. So that's why McDonald's, opportunistic as it is, quickly managed to open a so-called restaurant there. Anyway, this is a fragment of the facade towards the garden, and I think this facade is also facing east. By Le Vau. This is on the other side with the wings. You know, this is west. The other one is east. This is east. And it seems that Levaux worked here as well. But there were other architects involved with this great building and this great building site. I went several times to Versailles, but I never entered the palace. For some reason, well, it's true, I don't like excessive splendor. Plus, the beauty of the gardens is so great that it was enough for me. Okay, so now we are going to look at the Palace of Versailles, also in the work of Jules Hardouin-Mansart, and also when we talk about André Le Notre. So the next one we'll talk about today will be Claude Perrault. Claude Perrault, who, as I said, was not just an architect, but also a medicine man, meaning a doctor. Claude Perrault, 1613, 1688, and so a French physician and amateur architect. So this amateur architect did that beautiful colonnade on the eastern side of the Louvre. So who, together with Louis Levaux, Charles Le Brun, and François d'Orbay, designed the eastern facade of the Louvre. I forgot François d'Orbay. I don't know much about him. Perrault's training was in mathematics and medicine, and he was a practicing physician. Aside from his influential architecture, he became well known for his translation of the 10 books of Vitruvius, the only surviving Roman work on architecture, into French, written at the instigation of Colbert and published with Perrault's annotations in 1673. His treatise on the 5 classical orders of architecture followed in 1683. As a physician and natural philosopher with a medical degree from the University of Paris, Perrault became one of the first members of the French Academy of Sciences when it was founded in 1666. So I imagine l'Institut de France, which was built by Levaux, and you saw it, houses also the French Academy of Sciences. So a committee commissioned by Louis XIV, the Petit Conseil, Le Petit Conseil, comprising Louis Levaux, Charles Le Brun, and Perrault, the fourth one is not mentioned, designed the east facade of the Louvre. It was begun in 1668 and was almost completed in 1680, by which time Louis XIV had abandoned the Louvre and focused his attention on the Palace of Versailles. The wing behind the east facade was not finished until the 19th century with the advent of Napoleon. The definitive design of the east facade is attributed to Perrault, the physician, who made the final alterations needed to accommodate a decision to double the width of the south wing. Here was the man with a beautiful, wig, as the fashion was then, but you can imagine him without the wig. In all probability with a haircut like mine, so to speak. Anyway, drawings by Perrault. From a publication he did, and these are very interesting works actually, because he was a physician, and you can see here, they are amusing, they don't have anything to do with architecture, but it shows the wits of Perrault, of Claude Perrault. These are organs and all kinds of things that one can find. I don't know if inside this animal or inside the human body. The 5 classical orders, another animal with other, I imagine these are, parts of what the animal, is made of. Strange. Anyway, but interesting drawings. I don't know if he made the drawings or someone else made the illustrations, but I think he did. Otherwise, I wouldn't show them here. Now, images from the book he published, his translation from Vitruvius, and very interesting. I like this. You had an amateur architect who designed in good measure the eastern facade of the Louvre. He also was very active as a physician. He drew what you saw. So, a very rich and colorful, creative life, I would say. Again, another page from a publication with his work. It was a quest for, it was announcing in a way the 18th century, this quest for an encyclopedic knowledge. Anyway, I think an architect who also does these sort of things can have a very elastic and interesting idea about what architecture is or could be. Funny animal there. Anyway, back to architecture, proposal for a triumphal arch. So it looks like he did more than just the eastern or parts of the eastern facade of the Louvre. Back to some animals and the, intestines and organs and whatever. This facade of the Louvre, we already saw it. So we are talking about this here. So here we have the glass pyramid by I.M. And this is the classical facade, the one for which Louis Le Vaux, Claude Perrault, and Charles Le Brun, the painter, worked. And here it is. It's true, it does have dignity, and it has a certain austerity, which, gives it, a certain amount of aesthetical prestige. Plus, it's the Louvre, so it had to have this this dignity. So it seems indeed, although Le Vaux was involved in this building, also that Claude Perrault had a substantial contribution. This is the drawing of Blondel. So as we read, at one point, Louis XIV lost interest in the Louvre, so he went to Versailles. And there was a lot to supervise there or to, inspect. So, but I think they did a good job here. I like this colonnade myself. I'm not very, very, very fond of necessarily of neoclassicism, but I think this is very well proportioned and still has a certain amount of drama. The physician did a good job here, we could say. You saw this picture. You can see here, although it is considered a classical elevation, there are plenty of ornaments, something we don't do these days, as if the ornament never existed in architecture, which is not at all the case. Since the very beginning, even the caves, the primeval caves had ornaments, because the primeval men scribbled and inscribed on the walls of the cave all kinds of you know, sketches and designs, and some of them, many of them, are of an ornamental nature. Anyway, so the Louvre, Louvre, Claude Perrault, and Charles Le Brun. Charles Le Brun himself has, please, if you are interested, search for his name on the web. You will discover some very interesting drawings in particular. He was a skillful painter as well. He became le peintre du roi, the painter of the king. But somehow his drawings are more intriguing and almost modern. I like Charles Le Brun. Maybe I should make a presentation on him too. And now we go to the third architect, who was older, I mean younger. He was born in about 30 years after the others that we saw, including André Le Notre, with whom I will end the presentation today. But now we go to Jules Hardouin-Mansart. As you can see, he was born in 1646. Jules Hardouin-Mansart, and he continued the works of, you know, that began with Louis Le Vau, with Claude Perrault, and Charles Le Brun. So Jules Hardouin-Mansart was a French Baroque architect, again called Baroque, but anyway, we'll see. And builder whose major work included the Place de Victoire, Place Vendôme, the Dome Chapel of Les Invalides, and the Grand Trianon of the Palace of Versailles. His monumental work was designed to glorify the reign of Louis XIV, the Sun King of France. Here he was, with an equally impressive wig. Yeah, Jules Hardouin-Mansart. And so all these men were actually brought together by the incredible thirst of the Sun King, to express his power. And they did so. So we are going to see some of his works. So born in 1646, but we start with some drawings. Again, didn't I mention centrality, symmetry, authority? Well, here they are. Very clearly expressed. This is the Dome des Invalides, and Napoleon's tomb is here. We are going to see it. It's in Paris, of course. Now, the church of the L'Hôtel des Invalides in Paris, 1676, 1691. Why is it that I feel the power of authority here and the authority of power? Well, the building was meant to express this, and it's obvious. And we'll see who is the inhabitant, the most celebrated and well-known inhabitant. Look at this, you know, it's the power of centrality, of a centralized authority. Napoleon's tomb is here. So inside the church of Les Invalides, there's Invalides, I don't know, I never pronounced this word in English, is the tomb of the man who died exactly 200 years ago. Napoleon died in 1821. And also in 1821 was born an incredible poet, also French, who brought modernity with great force and intuition into the spirit of the time, Charles Baudelaire. And also in 1821 was born one of the greatest writers ever, Fyodor Dostoevsky. So in 1821, the inhabitant of this building by Jules Hardouin-Mansart, meaning Napoleon, he died. Napoleon died, I think at 52 in 1821. Also in 1821, the incredible poet Charles Baudelaire was born. And also in 1821, the incredible writer Fyodor Dostoevsky was born. I even thought of launching a competition, Baudelaire, a house for Baudelaire, Napoleon, and Dostoevsky. 3 men, a house for 3 men, very different, a poet, an emperor, and a writer of prose. Incredible, all 3 of them in very different ways. But here is the domus eterna of Napoleon. What can we say? You know, we struggle through life, and one day we end up, well, not so gloriously in such a massive, eternal home. But personally, I think this, majestic and forceful eternal home for Napoleon is a little bit in, I don't know what this picture is actually. Maybe that's how it was earlier. I don't know. Anyway, I find it a little bit in bad taste. Sorry to say it. I mean, you know, Napoleon was an emperor, yes, maybe a great man, but a man, limited. He made his mistakes. Many people died because of his unending thirst for, centrality, or the centrality of power. But what can we say? You know, the tourists and people in general are fascinated by exactly those people they try to rebel against, meaning the king and the emperor. Anyway, so to summarize, this belongs to Napoleon and is inside the church of Les Invalides, which was built by Jules Hardouin-Mansart. And you can miss it if you visit Paris. I mean, it's one of the destinations everybody goes to because of Napoleon, and also because of the, centrality of the building, the importance. You can see it from far away with its golden cupola towards the outside. Anyway, Jules Hardouin-Mansart. So now we talked about Louis Le Vau. We talked about Claude Perrault, and now we talk about Jules Hardouin-Mansart. And we'll end our presentation today with a presentation about the great gardener or landscape designer or architect of Louis XIV, the Sun King, that is André Le Notre. So you see, within the urban fabric of Paris, l'Hôtel des Invalides, which is a church, the church of the Invalides, is distinctly present, and you can miss it. And when you know also that Napoleon is there, even if dead, the interest in this location becomes even higher. That is, if you visit Paris. But all in all this architecture again celebrates and represents very clearly the centralized power that I was talking about, which at that time belonged to Louis XIV. So again, if we look at this city and we see this, planning here with its axes and symmetries, and we wonder, are these the same people who burned out Bastille? Yes, they are. Jules Hardouin-Mansart was younger than Louis Le Vau and Claude Perrault with about 30 years, and André Le Notre as well. André Le Notre, Louis Le Vaux, and Claude Perrault were born about the same time, 1612, 1613. Mansart was younger. Here he is, you know, competing with the Tour Eiffel. Yeah. Please do not entertain illusions that you'll have the chance to be immortalized in this way. We don't do this any longer to, you know, even to the most famous architects. Anyway, now Hardouin-Mansart's plan for a curving colonnade of Les Invalides, which was not completed. We saw already this image. A hall of mirrors of the Palace of Versailles, he built it. You know, it's an important room, if we can call it a room, inside Versailles. So it was done by Jules Hardouin-Mansart, not by Le Vaux. You know, it's, yeah, this is rather Baroque, but the facade towards the garden, as we learned, it's expressed in a very classicist or neoclassical manner almost by Louis Le Vaux. Look at this, you know, it's indeed a space for a great king. Was born today, as I said, in 16, I think, 37, 38. Anyway, the king himself was about 20 years, 25 years younger than Le Vaux and Claude Perrault, and some years older than the architect who did this, Jules Hardouin-Mansart. The Hall of Mirrors. There are many other things, not just mirrors. Of course, not a square inch of a wall or the ceiling is left, you know, uncovered. I guess it helps to be a king, you know. You can employ the services of artists, sculptors, architects, even physicians. You put them to work to employ their talent to express your power. And you know, power, political or military or financial, they understand. I mean, it understands that without art, without beauty, without culture, they mean nothing. That's why bankers, somebody told me, you know, kind of jokingly, artists always talk about money and bankers always talk about art, because we always talk about what we don't have. So the bankers have money, but they don't have art. The artists have art, but they don't have money. So there it is. We all want what we don't have, of course. So the king, he had all the power in the world. He lived for a long time and he was a monarch for half a century, if not more. But he didn't have beauty. He didn't create. He didn't. So he needed this desperately almost. The Royal Chapel of Versailles, also built by Jules Hardouin-Mansart. You see it in this representation, pictorial representation. The ceiling, glorious again. What can we say? You know, a magnificent biography, the biography of Louis the Sun King. This is a chapel within the complex at Versailles. Power and beauty, an interesting marriage. I would say sometimes difficult, but at that time, I guess it was thought and felt that it was not difficult at all to marry power with beauty. In fact, probably it was thought that in the absence of power, you couldn't achieve beauty. There are architects who think that you cannot create a great architecture in the absence of an authoritarian figure, even you know, autocrat, you know, a king, a pharaoh, emperor. This was formulated in in a similar language almost by a Romanian architect in Canada, a very well-known architect and accomplished, Dan Coma, who provoked some consternation in Canada with this statement. The orangerie at the Palace of Versailles, also built by Jules Hardouin-Mansart. Anyway, this was a continuous building site, they continuously adding new things and perfecting others and so on. It never ended. It was indeed, it's a complex work. Grand Trianon in Versailles, also by Jules Hardouin-Mansart. So we are still on the site of the Palace of Versailles with some works by Jules Hardouin-Mansart. Again, the gardens done by André Le Notre, and we'll end our presentation today with André Le Notre. I don't like Alamy pictures, but they have nice pictures. Unfortunately, they ruin them with their signature, so to speak. So you see the rooms are more sumptuous than the exterior in general. And maybe this is to be expected because the rooms need to be warmer. I mean, not in terms of temperature necessarily, but in terms of feeling. And there are textiles and paintings and all the rest, things that are more fragile, and it's more difficult to display them outside. Place des Victoires, the square of victories in Paris, with the king in the center on the horse. This was also designed by Jules Hardouin-Mansart. We are going to see another famous square in Paris, also designed by him. So yes, the king was everywhere, and not at the edge, not on the fringe, but in the center, to be clearly expressed what he wanted to be expressed. Place des Victoires, the square of victories, and okay, here it is. In a very central location, of course, in Paris. If you visit Paris, it's almost impossible to miss it. Place Vendôme, this is the other famous square designed by Jules Hardouin-Mansart. By the way, the word Mansart, from which the Romanian word mansardă comes from, doesn't derive from him, but from François Mansart, a different architect. Anyway, so here it is, Place Vendôme. And it was initially apparently called Place de Louis le Grand, meaning Louis le Grand was Louis XIV. And imitating the great Roman emperors, you'd almost say this is the column of the Trajan's column in Rome. Well, it's not. It's Place. It's in Paris. Again, centrality, the centrality of power represented very clearly. So you have no excuse if you don't get it right. At the center is the king. Just as the sun used to be, but now since we move around the sun and not the sun around us, things are a little bit more complicated. But yes, the sun, as you can see, is even Napoleon, when he was asked, or he asked himself, what religion would I like to take if I am to take a religion for myself? And he said, I would worship the sun, just like Akhenaton, the great Egyptian pharaoh. And in this case, the sun was the king and the king was the sun, or so he thought. Place Vendôme, again with the king at the center. We saw Place de Victoire, and this is Place Vendôme, or de Vendôme, ou Louis le Grand. Now it's known as Place Vendôme, but previously it was called Place de Louis le Grand, meaning of Louis the Sun King. So yes, such a central figure as the king has the power to coagulate, the energies of a city and the country, especially if, the king is as successful as Louis the 14th was. Okay, so from Place Vendôme we go to an Dijon. So we are not in Paris any longer, the Place Royale. But the feeling is the same. You can't be confused. Actually, it's the same expression, architectural expression of political and social power expressed aesthetically. Dijon this time. So all of these were built in the 17th century. So more than 320 years ago. Sorry about the resolution. Anyway, elevation of the central pavilion of the Chateau de Clagny, built for Madame de Pontespan. What can we say? The same kind of architecture. A Chateau de Dampierre with the door open, but I don't know if anyone would be welcome, maybe the tourists. Anyway, another chateau, another entrance perpendicular on the facade and centrally located. A lot of symmetry, of course. And a rêveur, a dreamer on the grass, contemplating a different time. Okay, so we are approaching the end of the presentation on Jules Hardouin-Mansart, and then we'll go to the last one, which is not the shortest, on André Le Notre, but André Le Notre deserves it brilliantly. I love André Le Notre. Chateau de Marly, this is just a rendering, and then Pavillon Mansart in Vanves. This one more austere. I think it was modified the exterior a little bit. Sorry about this resolution. I prefer the flowers to the building, to be honest with you. I don't think this is a great building, but I think it was modified. Chateau du Val in Saint-Germain in Laye, former hunting sadly remodeled in 1674, and it does look remodeled. This is somehow artificially looking and sterile. This is how it looked in all the times. It had more character. It should have been left like this, even if it deteriorated. Anyway, Chateau de Meudon transformed it in an observatory in 1877, and it does look like an observatory indeed. Also by Jules Hardouin-Mansart, but modified in 18 whatever. Maison Royale de Saint-Louis at Saint-Cyr, and here is, I didn't have pictures for this, another picture now though of Jules Hardouin-Mansart, who was himself architect du roi. So this is a marble bust by Jean-Louis Lemoine of this architect who, you know, left something behind him for the king, the Sun King. But now they are all dead, of course. And the portrait of Hardouin-Mansart by François de Troyes. No, is this? I'm confused here. I think this information belongs to this. I'm sorry about this. Anyway, and this is the last image, or one of the last images of his work, graphic work, which never came into being, or they came into being, the buildings, but they were destroyed. It's possible. Okay, and now we go to the man of genius. I don't know if the other three had, but I think André Le Notre did have what we call genius. And it is a pleasure for me to talk about him in this marathon for Louis XIV. Slideshow from the beginning. André Le Notre, Andrei al Nostru in Romanian, 1613, 1700. So he lived for 87 years, maybe because he was in the proximity of plants, of trees, of bushes, of flowers, of meadows, and because he had affection for them. But this engraving probably is more recent. I don't know. Anyway, we don't know very well how he looked like. André Le Notre, he was actually on the 15th of September, so not too far away from now. I should talk about him again, because that's when he died. Originally rendered as André Le Notre with an S, was a French landscape architect and the principal gardener of King Louis XIV of France. He was the landscape architect who designed the gardens of the Palace of Versailles, and his work represents the height of the French formal garden style, or jardin à la française. But he designed many more, not just the gardens of Versailles. Prior to working on Versailles, Le Notre collaborated with Louis Le Vau and Charles Le Brun on the park of Vaux-le-Vicomte, which we saw. His other works include the design of gardens and parks at Chantilly, Fontainebleau, Saint-Cloud, and Saint-Germain. His contribution to planning was also significant. At the Tuileries, in front of the Louvre, he extended the westward vista, which later became the avenue of the Champs-Élysées, and comprise the axe comprise and have the axe historique, I think, comprise the axe historique. Anyway, this is the man. I mean, they kind of look similar because of the impressive, you know, abundant wig. You wouldn't, if you look at him like this, you wouldn't say this is a gardener. Our conception about a gardener is not that the gardener looks like this, but we are talking about the gardener of the Sun King. At the Tuileries, you can see his bust here, André Le Notre, 1613, 1700. So again, all these four men that we talked about, including the one who commissioned them, the great king, they all lived in the 17th century. And here is a list of some of the gardens by him, and we are going to see some of them. We begin with Versailles and then Vaux-le-Vicomte and all the others, one after the other. Vaux-le-Vicomte, I leave the Versailles, I think, for the end. We already saw the building, which was designed by Louis Le Vaux, but the gardens designed by André Le Notre. At the beginning, I just show chronologically that list of his works, and then we'll go through some more detailed, individual presentations. This is the plan, the site plan of André Le Notre for Versailles, and I always love this plan. I don't think it was realized quite like this, but it's visceral almost. It's almost modern with all those diagonals. And there is a drama here that I like very much. Look at this, really, I think it has modernity, this plan, but it wasn't built quite like this. Anyway, the gardens at Versailles. We'll look at many more pictures from Versailles. Chantilly, another work by, the landscape design done by André Le Notre. I don't know who did Le Chateau, the gardens of Chateau d'Issy. You see, these are, the building, the chateau itself almost disappears. If it is something majestic here, is the landscape. And I wonder, how is it to design a house or a building where you begin first with a garden and then you do the house, the building, to match the garden, and not vice versa. And this one was, eaten up by the elements, but even the ruins are impressive. Anyway, these old pictures, I don't know, I didn't see recent pictures with it. It probably vanished, conquered by the passage of time. But I love these old, if you have a nostalgic state of mind, you like, I think, as I do, these photographs, these postcards. Okay, so this is a digital representation of the garden of this chateau. You see that, there is an arabesque here at work. They are not simplistically designed. So these are recent renderings. Great skill and great, resources had been invested to make these works possible. But some of them, like this one, vanished. Okay, the gardens of Chateau de Chambonat. Again, graphic representations, and now some images from the landscape designed by André Le Notre. He was very skillful, and he had, without doubt, some kind of a, if I'm not immodest, some kind of a cosmic understanding of the role of a park or a garden. This is in between a garden and a park. It actually comes closer to being a park. The gardens of Chateau de Versailles. Gardens of Chateau de Chantilly. This is an important castle, an important chateau, and look at the landscape. The incredible waterworks, and it's, what can we say? It's I mean, this conception about a building having so much water around it. It is indeed from a different time. I don't know who built the building, but the landscape design was done by André Notre, our André, so to speak. So all of these landscape designs were done by this man in his long life, and with the support of a king who had all the means at his disposal and the desire to transcend the the stringencies of military concerns and economical concerns and social concerns through beauty. André Le Notre, Chantilly. I visited, well, 3 of his works, Fontainebleau, Versailles, and Les Tuileries, the gardens of Tuileries in front of the Louvre in Paris. There is more to visit. Of course, now these, I just mentioned, the gardens of Chateau de Fontainebleau, they are magnificent indeed. This was a building dedicated to the kings of France, but the gardens are, you really achieve your peace of mind. There is a calmness that the large vistas generate and provoke in the viewer is very impressive. Maybe more than at Versailles, because at Versailles there are too many tourists. But here, when I visited, at least there was no one. And it was really very, very peaceful. And the buildings are impressive too. I don't know who built the buildings, but as I said, the landscape design was done by André Le Notre. And I imagine that it's not easy to take care of nature is not, it needs continuous attention. So it's not easy to keep a park or a garden in the state that the designer intended it for. A lot of sky about these works. It seems the gods agreed with the centralized power that Louis XIV was able to achieve. Gardens of Chateau de Sceaux. So yes, there is symmetry, but there are also all these, I call them arabesques, that complicate matters, and also in the good sense of the word. So it's not a sterile, rigid landscape as it might appear at the first sight. They are quite ample. These, look at this. Look at these trees, which are trimmed in this geometrical fashion, which is a trademark of what the French do, as opposed to the landscape design of the British. Why did they need to discipline nature in this way? Because we are talking about the nation that, again, sang at one moment and still does, liberté, égalité, fraternité. Is there here a lot of freedom? I think, yes, you can achieve freedom through restraint and even through geometrical trimming of natural impulses or, personal impulses. This is what the yogi does, so I wouldn't quite agree with the conception about freedom that Patrick Schumacher has, for example. Anyway, moving forward to look here, there are all kinds of sophistication because it's not just what is in the bidimensional representation of the plan, but it's also the section where you can see the terrain is not flat. And the trees, of course, are magnificent in the fall, as that picture was telling us. Anyway, the Tuileries in Paris, in front of the Louvre. I mean, from Place de la Concorde to the Louvre, we have the Tuileries, the gardens of Tuileries, you see the Dôme des Invalides, where Napoleon is, Tour Eiffel, and these are the gardens that you know, before the pandemic were filled with people, with tourists. Here is the Louvre, and here is Musée d'Orsay, and here is Seine, the great river that crosses Paris, and here is André-le-Notre. Jardin des Tuileries, the gardens of the Garden of Tuileries. So here is the Louvre, and plenty of tourists, of course. You see IMP's pyramid here, and Claude Perrault and Louis Le Vau's and Charles Le Brun's east facade is here. And l'Institut de France, which we saw by Le Vau, is somewhere here on the right. One of these bridges, maybe this one goes straight into it. There is a very interesting project done by a former student of SciArc in Los Angeles, somewhere in this area, I think. You can see it on Sucker Punch Daily, if they still show works, because they changed their site recently. I didn't check, but very interesting work indeed. Anyway. The Louvre, the Tuileries, Paris. Now the gardens of Château de Saint-Cloud. Yes, again, André-le-Notre. I rush a little bit because we still have to see a lot with Versailles. I will end this presentation with the gardens of Versailles. So this is, you know, at the edge of Paris. This must be Tour Montparnasse, le cimetière Montparnasse, the cemetery, the Montparnasse cemetery is not far away. That's where Brancusi is buried, and you know, surprisingly, he's not alone. There are two other people in the same grave with Brancusi, two painters who took care of him in his later years. Charles Baudelaire, who was born in 1821, whom I mentioned, is also present in that cemetery, the Montparnasse Cemetery. But strangely, he has two graves. So while Brancusi is buried in the same place with two painters, Baudelaire is buried in two places. There are two graves for the same man. Once he is with his parents, and then there is another one all by himself. Very strange, no? Even Émile Cioran is in the Cimetière Montparnasse, and he is not alone. I was very surprised to discover that actually Émile Cioran had a lover for half a century, and they are buried together. Simone Bouet, I think is her name. He never mentioned her in his writings. He never dedicated a page to the woman who went to work for him as well, because the dreamer was staying home writing and she was going to work, and he never mentioned her. Very strange, and I would say very unfair. Anyway, we move forward with splendid images about taming nature, because in a way, yes, that's what this kind of French landscape was about, taming nature. The gardens of Chateau de Saint-Germain-en-Laye, again, you know, vast spaces for those who afforded them, of course. And the tamed trees, the gardens of the Castle Saint-Germain-en-Laye. Anyway, they look similar, of course. But these engravings are impressive beyond the images we just saw, the physical images of how the gardens look. Like the project seemed to be even more majestic. And the fragility of the beautiful flowers can only make us dream. Gardens of Vaux-le-Vicomte, we already know that the building was designed by Louis Le Vaux. Now we see the gardens in more detail, and they are, you know, still impressive, still vast. A little not as vast as at Versailles, but still. André Le Notre, with a building designed by Louis Le Vaux. Now you could ask, why did the gardener do this? Well, you could ask the same question about the Persian rugs. Why are the Persian rugs indulging in so much ornamental work? Obviously, there was a need for this, a desire for this. Vaux-le-Vicomte, the building by Louis Le Vaux, and the gardens by André Le Notre. 17th century, France. I think, you know, the art of combining geometry with works of nature is not an easy art, because, you know, without a necessary sensitivity, you can very well, you know, do violence to nature. So to be able to bring geometry into the field of nature is a sensitive matter, and it has to be done with a lot of you know, care. I think André Le Notre achieved this. I personally think we need more gardeners in the world, more landscape architects and landscape designers, because we need more nature. We have already enough buildings. So what if we change the paradigm? First to the gardens, do them as well as possible, and then, if necessary, build some buildings to match the gardens. If we can bring in the sculptors, would be great too. You can see through the section here, the longitudinal section shows clearly that there are all kinds of sophistication here. It's not a flat terrain. And there are ample studies about, the views that you have in various points on this, trajectory, on this long longitudinal section. The perceptions in space are amplified or diminished because of this variation on the sections through the Earth. It was done intentionally. It was not because the terrain was like this. André Notre made it like this. All of these things were done really for the contemplative life. Now, yes, the contemplative life was meant for the very few. But today, we can bring in also the masses. But anyway, I think we better attempt ourselves to bring back to our lives vita contemplativa, contemplative life in some form. And now we arrive at the gardens of Versailles. I will end the presentation on André Notre with this major work by him, and I'll show many images. We already saw this plan, but it wasn't really built just as it is shown here. But I love this plan graphically, and everything seems to be so complex. It's almost like an imago mundi. We don't even see the Paris. Where is the Paris? It's like the garden this is the garden of God. Anyway, and here being, the residence of the king, of course, there was no limit in the resources they used, and the artists and the architects, they all tried their best. And the tourists now, well, until the pandemic, enjoyed the vast work that was done here. As we learn today, this facade with its rather classical traits belongs to Louvre, and then the garden to André Notre. Mansart had some interventions there too, but in general terms, the facade belongs to Louis Louvre. This is a universe in itself, the gardens at Versailles. It takes a long time to savor everything that it has to offer. And it's very pleasant to lose yourself through the garden. There is even a labyrinth, and there are many things. We also saw some other buildings by Mansart, and it was a major work for a major king. And this meeting between geometry and nature moves me. You would say it's outrageous to trim the trees like this, but somehow it works there. And the sculptures, of course, and the fountains. It's so much richness. There is a reference to mythology. It's a narrative landscape design. It goes forever. Goes forever. You know, it's maybe this was the. I mean, most surely this was the intention to evoke the infinite. So the palace is here. But then everything seems to be a palace, you know, if the wording is appropriate. Plan de Versailles. I think look at these courageous diagonals that cross the land. They are very important, these diagonals, because they are signs of, you know, of almost of rebelliousness, but they are signs of life. It is dynamic, the plan is not static. Well, the sculptures may be a little bit too white, or they are too clean now. Maybe they clean them from time to time, it's possible. I don't like stone which is so white, especially outside, it seems unnatural. I don't agree with Le Corbusier that at the beginning the cathedrals were white. He wrote about this, you know, when les cathédrales étaient blanches. I don't think the cathedrals were ever white, but that was what he imagined. Here, yes, the statues seem to be white, but I think this is done through a lot of cleaning, which disturbs me. And it's the same thing at Notre Dame, La Cathédrale de Notre Dame. I think they cleaned up the western facade where the entrance is too much. I prefer darker myself, you know, subjectively, if you want, the western facade of Chartres, which is not whitish, you know, which shows the passage of time. Here, these statues, they don't show the passage of time. My opinion, the mysticism of hygiene is too high here. Anyway, but the fountains are magnificent, and we are going to see some splendid images, I hope, with them, just for the glory of beauty and the glory of water and the glory of creation, of creativity, of art. Versailles. A cruel scene here. Look at this, you know, the strong animal killing the weaker animal. Maybe this is an emblem for life itself somehow. What made the designers of this garden to include such a statue here in this way? Why? Well, it seems there is some cruelty in what is sublime. Maybe beauty itself, if it is to also be true, should not turn its back on the tragism, I would say, of this face, of this weaker animal killed by the stronger animal. In a way, it's a metaphor for the injustices of this world. But water and the infinity of space and time seem to, level everything somehow. In the end, it comes everything to some kind of a peace. Louis Le Soleil is gone, Louis XIV, Levaux is gone, André Le Notre is gone, Claude Perrault is gone, Charles Le Brun is gone, Jules Hardouin-Mansart is gone. One day we will disappear. That's how life moves on. But maybe Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple, was right, and he was not the only one who said this, that death is the way through which nature renews itself. I think even Goethe said the same thing. So in the great dynamics of life, there is the interplay between life and death. They need each other, probably. Now, the trees of Versailles, and now I end the presentation on André Le Notre with this, is this artist, Laurie Victor Kay, who photographed the trees of Versailles in a certain way, in a specific way. And I like these photographs. They are probably to an extent manipulated, but they show something about the drama of the vast gardens of Versailles, especially the trees, which in this case are not trimmed. The beautiful trees. Avenue of trees. We need more trees in the world, and they are beautiful. And what would we do without them? We should not cut any tree any longer. Thank you.